Welcome back to another episode of Beneath the Grandstand, episode number 19. I'm Ryan Fenton. He is Mr. Alex Lohr. And Alex, how you doing?
Doing good, man. We're getting up there. 19 already. This is really rolling along now.
Feels like we're almost 20 years old here. This is good. And I do want to give a shout out to the listeners. Thank you for tuning in each week or bi-weekly, and the recent cadence we've been on. So we appreciate everyone tuning in, all of your comments and just ratings that you leave. So we really do appreciate that. We hope you have been enjoying the episodes. We'll keep these things rolling. There's a lot going on with our sub series of Flats and the Furious. There's a lot going on in the world of sport right now that we'd like to get to. So definitely, keep tuning in and letting us know what you think. And if there's things out there that you want some questions to, maybe there are things that we can bring onto the show. So, before we get into today's show, Al, I think one of the things, we've been talking about the last couple of days with recent news is announcements from the NCAA furloughing 600 plus people at their offices. Essentially, it sounds like most of the staff, with the exception of the executive team. A lot is going on, and we're starting to see this not just with the NCAA. We're hearing it coming from conferences. We're hearing it come from companies. Right, the effects of COVID are still around and are still continuing to affect sports. And again, it's more than just sports. We're obviously focused on sports here in this podcast, but the effects of those budget constraints we're starting to see that in some pretty major ways.
Yeah, it's interesting the move right now too, right? With the 600 furlough, and I'm interested to know, what kind of spurred that on as far as timelines, right? Because we've seen this kind of the boulder rolling at us that is a potential, shortened football season, and so I just wonder, like, what was the kind of budget hit that finally hit? If it was like, end of Q2 results, things like that, that ultimately spurred on this call by the NCAA to make this move. And I think it's especially interesting because, those 600 employees are probably the people who are, the ones who are going to, have to evolve what these seasons are going to look like, right? So, the executive teams and the conferences can make the calls on, what the future of sports could look like, but they need those employees, in the building to actually make those changes and put, put boots and wheels on the ground to actually put those processes in place. So it'll be interesting to see, how can you make a decision without the people in place to make it actually happen.
Right. And a lot of the staff too, you got to remember is an event-based staff, right? They're putting on championships, and they have members and team members that are there essentially to oversee those championships. And when there's no championships, there's not a lot to oversee. That said, to your point, the governance of this whole thing and the committees that are formed through athletic directors and administrators and coaches, there's NCAA internal staff that are on those committees helping be a part of those discussions and those decisions. So even if you're furloughed, I'm wondering, you're still probably gonna have to be involved in some of these things. So, I think it's going to be really interesting.
The work didn't go anywhere. The work is still there.
Yeah. And, to your point about what spurred it, I'm wondering if they're thinking ahead to basketball, right? We've seen Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski at Duke saying, like, hey, basketball needs to happen because it's 90+% of the NCAA's budget for the year. I wonder how much of it is constraint for what's already happened versus planning a safety net for what could happen if basketball was to take another hit. Because if that happens, there's going to be some even more significant issues there. So it's a development where we're watching, we're talking about, along with, in terms of the running world, the talk of possibly a winter cross country season, which I have so many emotions. I think as an athlete, I'm like, man, this is going to be a really cold, cross country season. As a fan, I'm like, man, put him in the snow. Let's see. And like, so I'm kind of all over the place if that was to happen. But the interesting thing that I first heard, and I don't know where if this still is in place, is that if there could be a possibility where you have to choose if they were to have indoor track and cross country, you're going to have to choose one or the other. You can't, if you want to run cross country, you can't run indoor. If you want to run indoor, you can't run cross country. And so that obviously affects distance runners more than sprints and jumps and field, but it affects how a team approaches, are we going after an NCAA title this winter? And if we are, which one?
That presents some really interesting questions as far as when the coaches are sitting out 2 weeks before conference championships, right? And they're putting people in different races to squeeze every last possible point out of every single race. Like, it's a completely different format now when distance athletes aren't involved. And I think it's interesting, like, if we have an indoor track season, like I don't know if I agree with the idea of like you can only do one or the other from a distance perspective. I feel like there has to be some sort of middle ground where, like, I don't know, if you're top 40 All-American, you get an auto into the 5K at indoors or whatever it looks like. I don't feel like if we have indoor, which I think is the bigger beast here, is like, how do we have indoor track with all the COVID precautions? But if we do have indoor track and we do have cross country, it's not fair to make kids choose, right? So hopefully we can kind of come to a middle ground here.
Well, and there's got to be a big eligibility discussion around this, because if you run indoor and you run cross country, do you lose 2 seasons of eligibility? Whereas if you only pick one, do you get to save that season at the end, which maybe is where that is, and maybe it's viewed as a protection for the athletes, so they actually have another season at the end. And but I think there's still a lot of discussion around this. There's a lot of development that's still going to happen. We're definitely not in the clear on any path forward at this point. I mean, I feel like things are still week to week, and so we're going to keep an eye on it and have our own discussions. And until we do, we're going to jump into today's topic, which is our another episode of our Flats and the Furious. This week, taking a look at our friends from Hoka. And Hoka's interesting, Al, because we've talked to a few people at Adidas and Asics and a number of conversations, even off recording, about kind of that arms race and that scramble to get product out once there was kind of a timeline marked by World Athletics and when shoes needed to be out to be on retail and in order to be eligible for Olympics and all this stuff. And everyone kind of thinks as Nike is the one that was pretty far ahead. Well, Hoka was actually one of the other brands that had a carbon plated shoe out, right, in early February, in early 2019. And then in midnight 2019 came out with a second version. So they were actually a couple iterations ahead of some brands. And one of our athlete guests today actually talks, we'll hear some insight about how he weighed that into his decisions, but excited about today's episode.
Yeah, I think it's really like and we'll get into from the product perspective. We dive into this and we talk about the Hoka perspective, and I think it was like this interesting kind of ownable thing. And like, let's be honest, like 5 years ago, we all saw the Hoka shoes and thought they looked like trapper keepers, and like they look like moon boots, but it's been this kind of ownable champion, flag in the ground for them, and they've evolved into this absolute beast of a brand that, from a business perspective, has tons of momentum. But also, like you mentioned, they had a lot of innovation momentum, and they were kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to the carbon plated shoe game. So I'm really excited to dive in today to our two guests. We like to bring in an athlete and a designer today. Our athlete is going to be one Rory Linkletter. He's coming fresh off an hour effort 2 nights ago with some of the Hoka teams, and he's all an hour on the track is ooh, that is rough. And so we're going to get Rory's perspective, and I think it's really interesting because he's a younger athlete, just came out of college, relatively new to the brand, and so he has. He's sampled a lot, right? He's tasted a lot of the brands, and so he has a cool perspective on this. And then we're really lucky to have Matt Head, the head of design, director of design for Hoka, join us later in the show, and he just has a really great perspective. And I kind of stumbled upon him, and he has an interview with somebody from the Pencil Academy on YouTube, and East Bay and Hoka did this cool collaboration around the Clifton Edge. So I found that on YouTube, and I think it could give you guys some cool context into the Hoka perspective. So really excited to have the athlete and the design perspective today. So we're going to roll right into our first part of the program, which is the perspective of the athlete. So we're going to bring in Mr. Rory Linkletter. All right, we are joined by the Papa Links, Rory Linkletter, joining us with some sore legs after an hour effort a couple nights ago. Rory, thanks for joining us and getting on the other side of the mic, because we know you have your own podcast. But we appreciate you joining us, and just give us a little insight. What were the last couple days like for you, and kind of on the race calendar?
Yeah, so I went to the Sunset Tour 5K like 2 weeks ago, and I ran the 5,000 there, and I just decided to stay in Southern California because we were going to do another event 9 days later in Santa Barbara, where we had me, Matt Baxter, and Nick Hogger going for 1 hour on the track, make it as far as you possibly can. We were pacing it out for the New Zealand national record because that was the more gettable, and like that was the kind of top tier where we thought like good day we could land here. And so after ripping around the track for about 30 minutes, I fell off the pace and had a rough last 30 minutes, but Nick Hogger, my teammate, ended up being able to snag some 10-mile American track record. So I mean, it was a learning experience. It felt like a marathon. I have ran a marathon, and that was probably worse mentally to run 40. I think I ran just about 48 laps on the track, and it was just insane. Like just the way my mind and body were feeling in the middle, looking at a clock and knowing I don't have a certain amount of laps left. I have 20 minutes left, and I'm already so deep in this hole.
Yeah, how are you counting that thing down? Like, are you still counting laps? Are you counting minutes? Like, what's going through your mind when you're fighting through after falling off the pace there?
So while I was on pace, it was like, okay, clicking off. I got 20 laps in, and I was still well under what we needed to be. We were feeling good, and then our pacer, Scott Smith, stepped off the track, and within like 2 or 3 laps, it just all got real fast. And I was like, I knew it wasn't in the cards when that moment came and I was asked to take the lead. We were going to trade leads between us, and Matt had already dropped out because he was feeling a little bit of injuries coming in and was really just trying to tough one out for the boys kind of thing. But it just wasn't his day, and it was just me and Nick once Scott Smith steps off the track. And Nick takes 2 laps. I'm hanging on, and I'm like, okay, my turn to lead and help. And I think we ran like 2 seconds slower than the pace we needed to break the record. And right after that lap, Ben kind of tells Nick, just go around Rory. It's on you. And I just was about done right there. And that was, I think, 24, 25 laps in. And it's just been a long season. That was a tough way to go out. And I remember thinking with like 31 minutes left, like, yeah, this is gonna be a tough one, but I'm not gonna quit. So I took like probably 5 minutes to sulk a bit and feel like, oh, this sucks. And then I was like, all right, let's get on an honest clip again and start trying to get the most out of myself. And I ended up, cruising in like 5-minute miles the last several, which I mean, far slower than I started, but at least I was able to keep moving at a decent clip.
Yeah, you had Craig and Meg Lutz on the broadcast. You had to give them something to talk about, so that was good. You kept at it.
Yeah. I mean, and I just Hoka went to all the trouble putting on the event. At least I could do is give them the hour of torture that they promised.
Oh man,
Thank you for putting this on.
31. Like to be in the hurt locker and still see 31 minutes left on the clock. That is rough. Because wait, was there a countdown clock that you were looking at? Did it work backwards from 60?
So we got to choose if we wanted it to count backwards or forwards, and we chose forwards because we thought that counting backwards would almost be worse, like mentally, like just being like, because you can do the math in your head, you know how much time is left. It's 60 minutes. It's not, but the worst thing for me was the lap counter, because it was counting up instead of down, and it was just like one more down, and it was just like it felt like I was running forever. But then like once you get into the 20s and 30s on laps, it just felt like these laps were taking forever, and they were, because I was running slower because I was hurting really bad. But it was a tough event. I definitely think if I were to ever do that again, which I'd like to, because I think that that's a record I could get if I am on my A game and prepared properly, and we have like a critical mass that can work together. But it's going to take more specific track work. I've been on the track like 4 times in 2020 just because of COVID, and I was preparing for Houston half before COVID, and it's just like when COVID hit, we didn't have any access to tracks, and then here I am trying to trick my body into running 50 laps on the track on a good day, and I fall short because it just wasn't there.
Well, we're going to turn this thing into maybe a little more positive note, which is the progress and innovation of the brand that you're running for.
We have no lap counters here. There's no time clock, so you're good. Free flowing. We're going on feel here.
Sounds good to me.
So Rory, just to give like our listeners a level set, right? Like, so you came out of BYU. Give us an idea of like, okay, Rory is running in what his senior year at BYU? Like this is your go-to trainer is what? And then you have to transition to this brand that was relatively still new when you were coming out, right? You didn't have a ton of familiarity with us. So like walk us through like the go-to trainer at BYU, and then slowly how you kind of evolved into a Hoka rotation.
Yeah, so one important thing I think to note is I worked at a running store like in the summers throughout college. So I had tried like a lot of different shoes. So I was familiar with Hoka, and I was a really big fan of their shoes for my easy runs in college. I'd even, working at a running store, you get discounts. Maybe you see a shoe rep, maybe they give you a pair to test out as they like launch new products. But I found that Hoka was a brand that was on my radar. NAZ Elite was on my radar, but I was wearing I was always a big cushion guy. So I wore Vomeros for everyday mileage, flats. I used anything from, a Streak LT to the 4% when it came out. BYU actually got everyone in their top 7 in cross country, like the second rendition of the 4%. And BYU also did like a study on the 4% in their biomechanics lab to like corroborate like the claims of 4%, performance gain or whatever it was that the claim was. But so I had 2 pairs of those in school. So I tried a little bit of everything. Back when the Lunar Racer was I think I had a few pairs of those. So yeah, I've had a handful of Nike trainers, flats, and spikes. And then now at Hoka, we have a large array of options as well. Like I have a rotation of 4 different flats that I use for different types of sessions with Hoka, and they all serve different purposes, I think. But it wasn't a huge adjustment for me because I feel like I've always been pretty durable, and I've always liked the shoe technology side and like geeking out about this kind of stuff. So I was excited to try something new. When I was joining Hoka, I'd known that they already had 2 different carbon plated shoes at the time, the Rocket and the Carbon Rocket and the Carbon X. And so I was really just happy that they were moving in the direction of innovation while some companies were still lagging behind.
Yeah, that was one thing we've talked with a few different athletes and a few different companies and about how a lot of them it was kind of this mad dash and this rush, but Hoka, was kind of there for a little while with the carbon shoe, and so it sounds like that actually was something you thought about in while you were going through the process. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a true like 1500, 5K and under kind of guy, you can probably think less about this, but I knew I was going to be a marathoner down the road, and I had ambition to debut in the marathon as soon as the fall after I graduated, which I did. And I was not going to ignore what I had seen happening on the global scale with, performance with shoes. And it seemed evident that there was an uptick in times being ran because of shoe technology taking off. And I wasn't going to lose time to my competitors over something like technology. So picking a brand that was able to compete with the technology race, the arms race for the best shoe was huge for me. And I knew Hoka was at least moving in the right direction while some people were kind of digging their heels in and waiting and waiting and falling further and further behind.
Rory, you teed up, that you were able to test out the kind of the first iteration of the Nike carbon plated shoe, and right before you made the jump into professional life. So I'd like to know, like, because you worked at a retail store, you've tried the other carbon plated shoes, like, so what did it feel like in the moment, that slip on, that try on comfort? What did the carbon iterations of the Hoka shoes, like, what was the differentiator? How did they feel different on foot?
Yeah, so it's kind of different between the different models. Hoka, I feel like, looked at the Carbon X as like the citizen runner marathon shoe. It's high end performance technology isn't necessarily as targeted at like chasing a sub 2 hour marathon like the 4% was originally. But it was an upgrade in shoe technology nonetheless, because it did have a carbon fiber plate. It did have the meta rocker, roll through. It had a good amount of cushion that and stack height that the shoe was working with. And I think that those are things that just help lend to, I guess, efficiencies in your stride, and not letting your stride break down late in races that are, lasting 2+ hours. And originally, when I tried these shoes, I was like, yeah, these are great flats. And then I got my hands on some carbon rockets, and that kind of, I was like, okay, I really like these ones because I feel faster in these ones. They are very poppy. I feel like I could race, a road mile in them because they're still pretty light, and you can feel the ground a little bit more, whereas the Carbon X was a little thicker and a little bit more stiff and rigid. So, I mean, they had their differences, but all in all, I saw a purpose in each of them, and I saw what the design team of Hoka was probably thinking as they made these shoes. And talking with shoe reps and my coach Ben Rosario about these things over time, I kind of see, yeah, this is the approach that they made, and I think they delivered on what their intention was for both of those shoes. And now they have the Rocket X, which is just a home run of a shoe.
Yeah, we got to hear a little bit of your take on the Rocket X. It sounded like there was some excitement in your voice when you talked about that thing, and I'd like to actually hear more about that and how that fits into the rotation of all these shoes now. So now you have this kind of arsenal of carbon plated shoes. What are they used for, and when are you picking each of these things up?
Yeah, so being in Flagstaff, we work out with our group. It's like, road loops, Lake Mary, like just crushing that rolling hills like paved road, or you're on the dirt roads, or you're on the track, NAU's track, or the dome, whatever it may be. There's like, the surface has a lot to do with what I'm going to choose. Then the second thing I take into account is like the difficulty of the workout, the speeds of the workout. So say I'm doing a steady state, and it's just supposed to be, get the work in. We're not trying to, blow anyone's doors off, just kind of lock into a pace that's achievable for us. I would maybe grab the Carbon X because I want to keep in my mind that this is not, a barn burner of a workout, but just kind of get the work in. And then say I'm working out at Buffalo Park where it's dirt surface, I'm going to use the old school tracer or the carbon rocket because I want to feel the ground a bit more and feel fast as I'm ripping around turns. If I'm on the track, I'm leaning more towards the carbon rocket because of the down, like the lesser stack height and the more responsive feel. It just has that pop. And then if I want a little bit of extra boost and feel like really, really efficient and fast on the road workouts, it's the Rocket X every time. We've done some pretty fast workouts where, that shoe just feels unlike anything. It's so light, it's so responsive, and it makes you feel like very fluid and within yourself. So I'm a big fan of that shoe. I definitely think it accomplishes what it's intended to accomplish, which is, save the legs, give the legs a little bit of a boost with the carbon fiber plate while still maintaining a good stack height for cushion and being really light.
For those out there that are, fans of Hoka shoes and are running in these, I'm curious, like, how much of your time is spent in a carbon plated shoe now versus a non-carbon plated shoe, and what non-carbon plated shoe are you wearing the most, and for what reasons?
Well, I mean, I definitely don't do my easy runs in carbon plated shoes. So we're on dirt roads for almost all of our easy mileage, and I just don't think it makes as much sense to throw on a carbon plated shoe for these, easy runs on dirt roads. So for those, I'm probably rocking a Clifton or a Bondi. Clifton's probably the A1, and then A2 would be the Bondi. And then if I have a faster road, like a long run scheduled, I'll throw on something like the Rincon or the Mach, which isn't a carbon plated shoe, but it's a really light, responsive, everyday trainer that you could probably get away with doing a lot of workouts in because they're just so light, but not necessarily giving you that energy return that a carbon plated shoe does. So I mean, that's the thing is as a professional athlete, we have obviously a large collection of shoes. So picking like one that I go to, it's really tough, especially for me because I love shoes. So I'm going to, if they're asking me what my shoe order is for this quarter, I'm going to say like one of everything, because I want to try them all.
It sounds like two Rocket X's though.
Yeah, definitely. Those are hard to get your hands on though. Those are the prized possessions.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting. That kind of kicks off my next question. It's like, we openly admit that these carbon plated shoes are like help you recover faster, right? And it's like, and they may, kick off a more efficient stride. So why do we justify, like, I love the Clifton, right? I wear the Clifton all the time. It's super plushy. I slap it on for most of my mileage, but if I had access to a carbon plated shoe that I knew would help my recovery and make me run like a little, more efficiently, like, why wouldn't I just wear a carbon plated shoe every day? Like, so like what is the negative effects of wearing a carbon plated shoe every day?
Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in giving your body and your feet and your lower legs and just everything this opportunity to feel different stimulus. That's why we may run grass workouts, more technical trails, dirt roads, paved roads, track. We're running on all these different surfaces and they all accomplish something different for the body, a really hilly run versus a really flat run. And that's why how I view the shoe game is if I wore a carbon plated shoe every day and it was doing all this work for me, what weaknesses would maybe arise? What injuries might flare up because I'm not giving my body the chance to, self-correct and work on the inefficiencies that my stride may naturally have. So really, I don't want to ever become reliant on a carbon plated shoe to feel really good. I'd love for my body to be fully capable of doing what I need it to do without the carbon plated shoes. And just like, when you're in high school and you do all your workouts in these trainers and then only wear spikes on race day, like you never touch a pair of spikes unless it's race day. There's something special about, I'm only going to call upon these carbon plated shoes when I need that little extra oomph. whether it be a very tough workout or a race, a road race. I think that there's something special to doing that. And I think we haven't seen enough data yet to rule out that these carbon plated shoes have a negative side effect. But I think that you'll maybe start seeing people that rely on these too much getting injured, and in places that they may not have gotten injured in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight, Rory. And I think it's something we will all need to address eventually, right? Like, what is this doing to our Achilles? What is this doing to our planner? I think I like you said, I don't know if we have enough data points yet to know what the effects are going to be, but I think we're going to start hearing some probably common use injuries among carbon plated kind of hardcore devotees soon. I'd like to lean into the mentality part of it a little bit, though, and I wonder if there's a little bit of gamesmanship with the teammates, right? So let's say you're about to walk onto the track or Buffalo Park for X repeat session. Is there a moment where you don't nobody wants to reveal what shoe they're going to pull out of the bag because no one wants to admit how seriously they're taking the workout?
Yes.
Oh, there's definitely a little bit of that. I would say if you show up to a workout and you're the only one, donning the Rocket X, maybe you're a little more scared than the rest of us are for this workout. Do you need that today? I was going to rock the Tracers. I don't even need a carbon plate today. I'm feeling good. I think that there's definitely something to that. You see a workout on the schedule that you're that's going to be one that I'm going to be on my hands and knees at the end, gasping for air. I want just to feel mentally that I have everything I need to attack this properly. I would say for the most part, we're pretty lined up on what we expect from the workout and what kind of shoe will give us the best chance. But every now and then you'll have, 2 Rocket X's and 2 Carbon Rockets in the same workout, or someone decided to rock the Carbon X, specifically Matt Baxter. He pretty much exclusively wears Mocs and Carbon X's for workouts. And that's just because he's just a beast and he can get away with that. He sometimes doesn't even wear flats. He's just wearing light trainers and doing the same workout as someone in a Rocket X. But, teach their own.
So is it are you guys showing up and figuring it out there? Or are you ever calling each other and be like, hey man, what do you think today? What kind of effort we got today? Or is it just an individual thing?
I think it's an individual thing, but it's also we just see the workout and we know what we're going to need. I think it's kind of one of those things that if the workout's hard enough, especially in these COVID times when racing isn't happening, it just, without anyone telling anyone, everyone shows up in a singlet and you're oh, all right. We need the singlet energy today. And we all knew it. And same thing with the shoes. It's you see 20 by 400 with 30 seconds rest and you're okay, it's on the track. This is probably something that we should wear, the Carbon Rocket for, which is what me and Fabel wore on that day. And I want to say Nick Hogger might have rocked the Rocket X that day, if I remember correctly. And it's did you need that extra little bit, Nick? I don't know.
Did you? I thought you said Rocket X. You just said Rocket?
It can get confusing with Carbon X, Carbon Rocket, Rocket X. You could, if we did try to coordinate it, someone might still not show up in the right thing.
Well, it sounds like it was to his benefit though, because he did last the longest in the hour race the other night. So maybe he wasn't he had the right call there.
Yeah. That could be right. That could be the reason.
I have another quick question for you from a footwear perspective, and but this isn't related to running. You you wanted to move our podcast recording time because you had a tea time with Mr. Scott Fabel. But I'm wondering what the footwear on the links is for Papa Links. Is it Hoka still on the golf course? Is it Decker related? What is there carbon plated footwear on the putting green?
So definitely no carbon plates. I think that anything that has like that big of a platform would be bad for your swing. You kind of need that ground contact. I've been rocking some Kavu slips, which are kind of like a lower profile, lightweight
Kavu
shoe that I mean, if I need to, I'll bring out the real golf shoes, but it's like most of the time I'm just walking around in the slips. But yeah, I try to don a little bit of Hoka on the golf course, and because sometimes it'll come up. You gotta rep the brand at all times.
You don't want Mike McManus or Craig Lutz, seeing you on the links with carbon plated shoes and be like, dude, we just sent you those. I thought you were running low on them and you're just using them on the golf course.
Yeah, that would be an inappropriate, unnecessary use. I don't think it works quite the same. I don't think your drive will go an extra 50 yards because you're wearing the Rocket X. Like you might make an extra couple seconds on a repeat because of them.
Hey, if you're on foot though and not in a cart, you're gonna get through that course much quicker.
Yeah, that's true. But
talking about a speed golf round,
we always take the cart. We don't walk the course. Got to save the legs.
Nice. Well, hey, Rory, we want to make sure we give some love to some of the projects you're working on. I know you're headed into the off season, so we won't get to see you on the track, but you guys have a pod of your own, and we want to give you a second to plug that and maybe tease us with some of the stories coming out of some of the content you guys are pushing out.
Well, first of all, it's me, Nick Hogger, and Matt Baxter that have started a podcast. It started the beginning of this year, sometime in January. We went on a long run together and we're like, we could probably make a podcast. Let's do it. And then it was like a couple weeks of thinking about what our name would be. And we just like landed on, well, we were all rivals back in the day. So we ended up calling it Running Rivals. Pretty easy to come up with that one. It wasn't crazy, but we basically, talk a little bit of banter. We bring on different runners, pros, coaches, collegiate athletes, whoever it may be. And we just get to know people, and we, maybe talk a little bit about what's FlowTrack saying, what's Let's Run saying about this, maybe a little bit of what's the gossip in the running world. Joshua Cheptegei breaks a world record. It's anything like that. We're just talking running. We're just being running nerds and giving each other crap for various things, and just enjoying some other outlet for our fans, people that are fans of the sport, to get to know us and kind of see what these pro athletes think about everything happening on the scene. You see very similar things with other athletes starting their own podcast now, and sooner or later we're going to be testing you guys for your jobs.
You're gonna get bought out by Spotify or Bill Simmons in the Ringer sometime soon here.
Yeah. That's the goal, is to be purchased by someone. I mean, maybe you guys can purchase us. You guys are big ballers now.
We can treat you to dinner maybe now that you're out of the NCAA. Does that count?
Yeah, I'm taking all sorts of rides now. I look for any opportunity to profit off my name and likeness.
Well, how about I'll promise Fable a sleeve of balls since I took his his golf partner today. So I'll pay it forward to him.
I think he was like, just tell them something came up. I was like, I already told them that I was trying to make a tee time. I don't think they'll believe me if I just say, hey, rain check.
So it's good to know where our priorities lie on Fable's tree too. It's good.
He's not concerned about whether or not I make it on this podcast. He just wanted someone to go out to the golf course with and take some money from, maybe gambling on holes.
Love it.
Oh man. Well, hey, we love that you have a pod going. We love when athletes kind of take hold of their story, and I think it sounds like some kind of like on the run banter is something that everybody needs to hear every once in a while. So definitely check out Running Rivals after you finish this pod, queue up the next one. And Rory, we thank you for joining us today. And we'd love to get the athlete perspective on this footwear. Gave us some cool insights and kind of your perspective and where you're coming from, I guess, as a footwear guy in the first place. But now we're going to get into the nitty gritty a little bit and bring on the head of design at Hoka, Mr. Matt Head. And now that we have a little of the athlete perspective on deck, we're gonna tee it up to the design team and some of the brand perspective. We're gonna bring on Mr. Matt Head, the head of design from Hoka. Matt, thanks for joining us today. And where are you joining us from?
Hey guys, I am joining you from sunny Santa Barbara in California. Great to be here.
Good. Well, we're excited to have you on, and we've been getting into the nitty gritty about running footwear and running culture a little bit with the athlete already, but we want to tee it up and talk about what inspires you, Matt. Maybe outside of running, what are the things that you keep the pulse on? Any design, I guess, influences outside the running circle that inspire you daily, or any interesting innovations that you're seeing outside our little running world?
Wow, you start with a tough question straight away, so I appreciate that. But yeah, obviously my background is design and industrial design, so I wasn't trained specifically to start with in footwear, so always interested to see what's going on in the world. I think that something that's been really interesting over the last few years has been the development of products and services a bit more targeted to people's well-being, and not necessarily coming at it from the performance side. So even in footwear, you see a change of the messaging a little bit, and talking about people's mental health and sort of opening that up and not making it so much of a taboo. So I really love some of the meditation services, things like that. I think anything that demystifies being healthy, just both mentally and physically, has been really exciting for me. And then in footwear itself, what a great time to be a footwear designer in performance footwear, because the market's changing so rapidly, and we get to be part of that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Matt. I think it's kind of a perspective, right? Like you're giving a design innovation kind of mental perspective, but the very functionality of that approach to wellness instead of performance. I guess how does that come to life in the footwear sense?
Yeah, that's I didn't expect to get so heavy so quick, but I think that particularly at Hoka, and I can't speak for everyone else, but we try to come from a perspective of empowering as many people as possible, and so that can really lead to tangible aspects in the product, such as the geometries, and obviously we're famous for our geometries. And then beyond that, you think about it down to the finishing details, the way the product feels when you put it on, the coloration, or what that does for your mood. So we really try to consider those sort of details to put whoever the target consumer is into a certain mindset when they put our shoes on, whether that's, I can't be bothered to get out of bed, but I need to get this run done, or I'm on the start line and I'm Jim Walmsley and I need to go out and set a world record. So I think there's a lot of mental aspects involved.
I want to ask you about the kind of the opposite end of that question, where things first was things that inspire you outside of running, but you coming from more of an industrial background, you said now that you're in footwear and in the running space, where do you look for inspiration? Where do you say, man, these are really cool things, and you see areas where they're kind of pushing the envelope or leading the way?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because there's always great sort of small quantity things done in the sort of lifestyle space or innovation space by all the brands that you would expect. that don't necessarily have a consumer that they need to fulfill a large volume of. So if I'm looking for interesting techniques or things like that, I may look over to that space. In terms of the running space, I don't want to be biased working for Hoka, but we have such a unique perspective that inspires me a lot myself. And I've found that with us leading in a certain way and not focusing on other brands too much, we've really been able to sort of grow in the mind of the consumers and have them think of us as a go-to product. When we think about finishes and things like that, quite often we look to spaces outside of footwear. So, in automotive, the color, the materials, and the finishes there. Even if you look at, say, home products like home electronics that you see in people's houses these days versus a few years ago, now quite a lot of them are covered in textile and they're supposed to be soft and inviting. So we want to think about the same thing when we're creating footwear. How do we create that experience that encourages someone to put their to take the shoe off the shelf and put it on?
Yeah, Matt, I'd love to, you tease this a little bit, but I'd love to chat about, that Hoka perspective, and maybe how it might be different to, if you look at your background, I think you had some time at Innovate, you have some time at Reebok. I guess the Hoka perspective though, when you put a brief on the table and when you're sitting down, with all the investment partners, the PLMs, the development team, supply chain, the Hoka perspective, onto this seems to be different. And then we saw an interview with you where you spoke to the approach of you are solving a problem first. So Hoka is a function first sort of approach. And I'm wondering, how that might differ from some of your other brands, because it seems like if you're solving for function first, and it might actually kind of open the aperture of what is acceptable aesthetically. Is that fair?
I think you make a really good point. I think there's, if you think about the founding of Hoka, it came from a super niche perspective, which was, ultra runners doing super long downhills and getting knee pain. And what the founders focused on was solving that problem and not solving anything else. And they came up with a really compelling solution performance-wise. That allowed them to get their foot in the door. But then what has allowed us to scale has been that you still then need to aesthetically finish the product in a way that is accessible. Now certainly the market has changed and the maximal look is acceptable to a broader range of people, but there's ways you can go about it. So we really want to, at the brand, embrace that look of the comfort, encourage people to get into our product and feel that benefit that we offer. So depending on the style, sometimes that could be celebrating the cushioning, and other times it could be making the cushioning look more palatable. So it really depends on the consumer, on the brief, and what particular problem we're trying to solve in that instance.
As a designer, when I guess for me as a non-designer, when I hear the term designer or meet someone who's a designer, I just assume that your mind is about how do I make this look awesome? How do I make it look really good? And again, Alex said we were listening to an interview and it wasn't about the good look first, right? And we're in the world of footwear, right? There's so much done where footwear, even in running shoes, where it's such a casual product now, right? People wear it not just to run, but in every parts of their life. So how is that for you when you are coming from a design side, and you may be starting with a product that's not at first glance the one that's like, that's a sexy looking shoe, let me make this look even better?
Yeah, and that's definitely the case with Hoka, and it's certainly, at the start provided barriers for the brand in terms of getting some acceptance. But the good thing was there was authenticity in the product, and we found that even though it was solving the problem for those running downhill over long distances, also when we transitioned it to road, it was solving the problem for people running in general, and that those people that kind of felt left behind with running shoes in general, that they couldn't find a shoe to put on them that allowed them to run without being injured or to come back slowly. They found that with Hoka they could do that. So that, no pun intended, gave us the foot in the door. And then what we've done over the years is take that form and really embody the message we're trying to give. So for example, in a plush daily trainer like the Bondi, it's like, hey, you're just really gonna love this, smooth, soft experience in this shoe, and you can just, crank out your training miles or your short miles at whatever tempo you need to. And then as you move to something like the Clifton, it's like, how can you make people look at this soft, cushy shoe and think, wow, there's a bit of energy there and there's a bit of tempo and I can vary my pace. So it gives the designers a really good challenge, because we work on the base form first, and then we think about the emotion that we're trying to convey and the experience we're trying to give second, to give the shoes their different personalities.
Matt, you know, with Hoka, they've done a great job of, they fix this, functional challenge, and they haven't, it almost seems like they haven't, wavered in their approach. And it's almost like that ownable thickness and that thick silhouette has been this kind of ownable flag in the ground for Hoka. And because it's now sort of been accepted, I'm curious to know, has there been a point where you looked at a shoe and you looked at a silhouette and you were like, well, we can lean that out. We can make that a little, I don't know, a little more, a smoother design, or we can look this more palatable to the typical running consumer, but you stopped because you wanted to make sure you weren't like losing that kind of brand loyalty that had, because at this point you guys are owning it, is that a factor in your in the kind of design flow now, that like, hey, we've embraced this, like, and there's no going back?
I mean, absolutely. We're known for being bold, so that's a tension we deal with every season. Is, how do we remain bold as a brand, but become as inclusive as possible? And so you'll definitely see where we make designs more palatable without compromising on what the shoe is about. So functionally, they will do the same thing. But if you look at, say, a Clifton 7 versus a Clifton 1, I think if you asked 100 people, 99 of them would rather wear the Clifton 7. So you still move with the time, even though you keep your USPs in the product.
Matt, in terms of the process, we've looked at the shoes over the last few episodes of the Flats and Furious here. A lot of folks we talking to come from the PLM side. And so in terms of the process that you guys work through, and whether that's, Carbon X or any shoe, what's we've heard from the PLM side on kind of how their things initiate and start for them, but for you, where you're getting the information from a PLM and have to bring this to life somehow, can you kind of talk through that process and, some of the excitement about it and maybe some of the challenges and kind of being the first to create something that someone is bringing to you?
Sure. Well, at Hoka, we have 3 teams, which we kind of call the product triad, which is the product line management team, the design team, and the development team. And we all work, really closely to create the products. It's a very collaborative process. The product line managers are often the people that spend the most time in the particular space. So for example, the running space, and are really up on the latest happenings and can then really outline to us an interesting opportunity that we should all be looking at. And then once we have a solid opportunity, it comes over to the design team, and we start sort of a dialogue back and forth with the development team involved as well as to what is right for this space, because everyone will have slightly different opinions, but that healthy tension really helps us create a great product. As the design team, we'll often find that we're pushing for the future a little bit, but the product line managers are really good at keeping us grounded in the key specifics, and the development team, they're really important in terms of telling us what's feasible or helping us to make something that we think might not be feasible at the moment. So every cog in the machine, as it were, helps to elevate the product. I think if either one of the team was on their own, the products would end up substantially worse. I think if it was just the design team, it would be a bunch of concept cars that don't really appeal to anyone. Whereas, if it was a development team, everything would be made very well, but maybe not as progressive. And if it was a PLM team, it may focus a little bit on the things that the runners are looking for, but not necessarily progress along or be in as inviting a package as it could be. So we all have different roles to play.
Matt, I want to bring you back a little bit to the Carbon X specifically, and you talked about the tension kind of between that triad, especially with this kind of this new innovation with carbon plated shoes. What was the biggest challenge? Bringing in this new innovation into your silhouettes. What was the biggest challenge in the design process to actually, from concept to getting Carbon X on the foot of athletes? What would you say was the biggest kind of tension?
Yeah, well, fortunately, we have a really great innovation team at the brand that have been working on carbon fiber or plates in general and products for 3 to 5 years before we launched the Carbon X. And actually, we had launched the Carbon Rocket just a few months before, which was a little bit more of a narrow focused product, but it kind of proved the concept of using a carbon fiber plate in a Hoka product. So when it came over to us, we felt confident about working with larger geometries because it's what we do day in, day out. So we felt really good about that. So really, it was understanding the particular execution of the plate itself in terms of the geometry, the composition and thickness of that. I think that was the most difficult part of the solution. But the overall form we felt pretty confident with because we've been working with larger volumes for quite a long time.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on that, Matt. I mean, I think it's interesting. Some of the brands that finally did embrace the plates, right? And you talk about Hoka embracing the larger geometries. Do you feel like because you were already in that kind of bigger stack height world, that bigger thickness, did you think that your team kind of had a little bit of maybe a head start or an advantage compared to some of the other brands whose typical road racing flat, is super minimal, maybe an 8mm drop? Like, talk about kind of, I guess, the advantages and kind of maybe what was the product differentiators that Hoka brings to the kind of carbon plated foot race now.
Yeah, so if you think about it, we've been working with larger volumes for just over 10 years. So we really tried a lot of things and worked out what works and what doesn't work. And every time it's been through the lens of authenticity. So we felt steadfast in knowing what works in that space, where a lot of other brands would be like, this is the first time we're encountering on this. So we really don't know what's going to work and what isn't. So we almost had, 10 years of samples to sort of get us ready to then go and add the carbon fiber in as well. In terms of how we kept our product different, we really just kept to the tenets of our brand, which is making sure that we're trying to deliver a product that is as inclusive as possible, so it delivers that benefit for those that may be a higher level athlete to someone that's just getting into a carbon plated shoe for the first time as well. And so the way we did that was through some of the aspects that are in all of our products. So for example, nearly every Hoka product is inherently stable. So we didn't want to lose that in this space because we wanted people to have a nice, smooth experience in the product as well. And then another thing that a lot of brands probably only just started working with are rockers in general and playing around with their toe spring and where the rocker starts. That's something that's baked into Hoka products. So we already knew what to do with our rocker. And then what we really did was we used the carbon fiber plate to ensure the integrity of our rocker, because our rocker is all about the shoe functioning like a wheel and rolling smoothly. So by adding that carbon fiber plate, we were able to keep the rocker in the shape that it should be for longer, to mean that as the miles stack up for wearers, they could still get a great performance out of their product. So I think having that Hoka DNA definitely helped us when developing the product.
I got a question for you about the actual launch of the product with the Carbon X. I think we saw, obviously when Nike did a launch around carbon shoes, there was a big marathon record attempt in this chase, and Hoka kind of did their own record attempt when the Carbon X came out, and so we see that on the outside as a fan, or in the media, and we see what happens once that event takes place. But for those behind the scenes, when you think about a shoe launch, that, hey, the shoe's coming out this date, you can pick it up in retail and buy whatever, versus, hey, the shoe's launching and we're actually going to launch it around an event and an attempt by our athletes to wear the shoe and do something really special. Is there more pressure? Are you watching that and being like, man, we hope this thing holds together? Like, what's going through your mind as someone on the inside that's brought that to life when it gets some added attention?
Yeah, well, I feel like by that point for myself personally, I really want it to go off well, obviously, because a lot of time and effort has been invested in the product. But I'm also at a point where it's like, we put so much effort in to create this product. I feel good now. We believe in this product, and what happens. And again, we knew the shoe would work for a broad range of people. So even if on the day a record wasn't broken or something like that it didn't matter too much, because the event itself was ambitious for a brand ourselves, and the fact that Jim got the world record was great as well. But we knew that people would find the Carbon X after that, because it does its job as all our products do. So, definitely some apprehension, but overall I'm like, the design's done, I feel good.
Plenty of hours put in to make sure you felt good about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, we started talking about actual athlete performance, right? And I wonder, we've had a lot of conversations with some athletes who have been, working with carbon plated shoes, and there's a discussion we've had with them that is essentially, you put on a carbon plated shoe, and yes, it makes you faster in the moment when you are running. But some people might argue that the greater benefit of some of these carbon plated shoes is the recovery that you get, and the, I guess what an athlete would say, you're able to stack harder workouts on top of each other. And so, it almost brings in a completely different perspective to how you could be using footwear, and what your footwear rotation could really be. Because that there's, we're seeing this spike in like a recovery aperture and ability. How might that affect future footwear? Could we see footwear that is, just specifically worn to crush workouts? It's not, IAAF or street legal, but it is, able to put you in a really, recover super quickly and enable you to run at PR paces in workouts. I wonder how that might affect the overall kind of next generation of footwear evolution.
I think it's a super interesting thought, and I'm sure if you spoke to a number of our athletes, they'd be like, yeah, let's get this stuff rolling straight away. I think on our side, it's obviously a message I'm repeating quite a lot, but when we plan out a product and when the product line management team think about strategy for the season working with us, we're thinking about trying to get that broad appeal. So as soon as we start to narrow the focus a little bit, maybe we're not reaching as many people. But, converse to that, if having a multiple plated product allowed us to have the ultimate training shoe that could be accessible by as many people as possible, whether it was carbon fiber or a different material or whatever, then it could be really interesting. I think we're looking for ideas that are accessible and that allow people to get the best experience possible. So I think it's definitely an interesting idea, but we need to make sure the idea has scale and can be enjoyed by a number of people as well.
Yeah, I'd love to, that's a common, another common thread that comes up, it's fun to talk about where, the trajectory and how far we can really take this, right? But at some point we need to talk about accessibility, right? And especially for Hoka, because I think, Hoka was a brand that was approachable and it felt accessible to every runner, right? So how do you start balancing this spike of innovation with this support of accessibility and inclusiveness for everyone?
Yeah, well, I think as we're fortunate at the moment, we're growing as a brand. So with that comes more resource, and then resource allocated appropriately. So we will always put effort into innovation, because doing something different was what got us here. And then at the same time, we'll really dig into the details and make sure that we're delivering world-class training product that's accessible for everyone, or world-class entry product. So we try to balance both sides, and we have dedicated resources working on both sides as well. So we just try our best, I guess.
Matt, where's Hoka's path go from here? I know you guys are normally working relatively far out, but where is, whether it's aesthetics, design, innovation, where do we go from here after this? And again, we've kind of been talking about how the carbon plated shoe has been such a kind of a marker in innovation across the industry, and has allowed athletes to kind of do things that some people didn't think was possible, right? And so where do we, in your mind, how do we follow that up, and what's the path?
Yeah, well, I think for us it's always been about what's the end experience going to be. So we're definitely a experience focused brand. We also have loads of experience in terms of geometry. So geometry is always an important consideration for us in terms of how we improve experiences, and not necessarily just at the knife's edge as well, in terms of improving everyone's experience. On the carbon side, or on the carbon fiber side itself, we are in a couple of months launching the Rocket X, which was the shoe that Alafine Tuliamak used to win the Olympic trials back in the days before COVID, which feels like so long ago. So we're continuing to keep up the pace there, and launching new foams in that. So on the technical side, we're still doing new things, but then outside of that, we're just trying to solve problems and deliver new experiences that can appeal to as many people as possible.
Matt, you mentioned Althine, and I gotta wonder, for a brand, that has had a ton of, started small but has had all this momentum, and now you have this moment where you get to see, this product that you've poured all your talent, blood, sweat, and tears, and bandwidth into. You get to see it on the Olympic stage. What is that like for a designer to see their art on a start line like that?
I mean, it's a fantastic achievement for everyone involved in the brand, right from our team to the rest of the product creation triad, through to teams like our sports marketing team that are giving athletes an opportunity to go out and do great things. So a lot of appreciation for them. At a personal level, it's always great to see your products being used by people in all sorts of spheres. But I'm just as happy receiving an email from someone saying that, like, the latest Clifton helped them to run when they couldn't run in anything else, as I am in seeing what Alafine does, which was amazing. But it's like, just knowing that you're reaching people is what really matters to me, and trying to improve their experience.
So it sounds like you don't get caught up in a lot of the noise that was going on around the trials. It sounds like, and I say that because, the Nike shoe is circulated and probably more heavily, I think, in around the top men's field, but Hoka kind of took down that women's field, in a number of different ways. And so, I got to assume that was a proud moment with all the hype around the shoes at the time.
Yeah, I mean, the whole team worked on a really great product there, and it was a smart improvement from what we had done with the Carbon Rocket, and then taking some of the learnings from the Carbon X. So it was great to see that out there proven, but ultimately we're just a small part of what the athlete goes out and does. So we were really, really proud of seeing that. And in terms of the noise, we know that we can't compete on the level of someone like Nike. So we just got to focus on authenticity, whether it be out there or whether it is with the everyday consumer. And we know that if we focus on that and keep caring, that we'll be all right at the end of the day.
And when will the launch of the shoe be that we got to see Alfie and win that race in?
I believe it's November, but product release launch dates are not my special skill.
It's a good Christmas gift if people are trying to target something.
I influence no one, but sure.
Well, Matt, we really appreciate you joining us and giving us some insight behind what's under the hood at Hoka and everything that went into the development of your shoe and the experience around it. So we'll be looking out for that next launch and looking out for more innovation and great product from you guys, and appreciate you for joining us here today.
Thank you both for having me as well. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks very much.
Love getting the insight from the people living this on a day-to-day basis and behind the scenes, and maybe the athlete, not so much behind the scenes, but folks like Matt who are behind the scenes and helping bring these things to life. And the first part of that conversation was like the thing almost that stood out the most when we asked him, what inspires you outside of running? And keep in mind the context which we're speaking to an industrial designer who kind of threw out meditation services and health and wellness. And it was just like totally caught me off guard, and it wasn't even in my perspective of like where you would derive design inspiration.
Right. Yeah, every time any industrial designer that I've met references things like chairs. They're obsessed with chairs, right? So I thought it was really interesting that he went, very ethereal on us. And he even talked about the colors. And it's interesting that he spoke about that. And then we dove right into the functionality and solving a problem. And it was almost like we flipped right into like kind of an engineering perspective. So yeah, I love to understand the approach of people like Matt, and it was a different perspective. He's like an actual designer. And so I thought it was interesting. He also resonated with a common thread that we've been having through these episodes. He kept saying accessibility and authenticity. And the accessibility factor is really interesting, right? How do we make this technology? It's real. Again, it's like amazing to talk about, and we can all see the benefits, but like, again, running needs to be accessible, and like that's core to Hoka's brand, right? Is it's approachable to anyone. So it's like they have to walk this fine line of like creating this, momentous, level elite product, but they still have to maintain that perspective that, Hoka is for everyone. And I think that's a really interesting balance that all the brands are facing right now.
Yeah. And I think you brought it up at the top of the show, just like their commitment to solving problems first. And, you said like 5 years ago, you looked at a Hoka shoe and it looked like a moon boot. They're like, yes, that's true. And they don't shy away from that, because their commitment was around what's the problem and how do we solve it? And then once we have that fix, let's make that fix look as good as it can be. And then we'll iterate from there. Right.
Yeah, it's like the egos are down, right? It's just like they just get into the guts of fixing a problem. So I thought that was and it was spot on for the Hoka perspective, right?
And they've built, because of that, I think they've built such a loyal following, right? And people love the brand because of that, right? It's true to their mission, and they have, like he said, you look at the Clifton 1 or the Clifton 7, you probably want to run the Clifton 7 now, but like where they started and how they began, they've grown obviously a loyal following, but then now they've grown even outside of that. And one of the folks they've grown into and grown with now is a guy named Rory Linkletter, who we got to talk to. And, I loved how he actually weighed in on his decision of what company he was going to go with, to the company that was pushing ahead in innovation. Right. And he said, I wasn't going to lose seconds or minutes if I didn't have to. And, Hoka was there, and they had technology that was leveling the playing field to the competition.
Yeah, I think that was, I don't want to use the word brave like too lightly here, but like, yeah, he joined a brand as a professional with, we see these athletes coming out of college with not a ton of like allegiance or like association with the brand, but he jumped into this, like the Hoka team, like, and right on the right upswing, obviously, a guy who's jumping into the marathon, guy who's familiar with like rocking Vomeros, it's like a big structured, like plush shoe. It that like seemed to fit. And it's interesting that Rory represents that kind of generation that started to truly consider Hoka as like a real elite brand that was an option for some of these people coming out of college. So I thought that was really interesting. What I thought my favorite part about Rory's insight was, when I asked him about like, well, why don't we just rock carbon shoes every day, guys? The iterations of like, wearing different types of shoes, wearing different, stack heights, or, whatever, it's different tractions on different treads. And, I think that was a really interesting insight, because, but the old school approach is like, hey, let's just do some barefoot strides, right? Like keep our toes strong. And, and I'm like, but now, he took that one step further, and it's like, that's why we're not always rocking carbon plated shoes. It's like, we don't quite know what that's going to do to our bodies. And I think that's a really interesting insight. And I'm sure there's like this sounds like a master's thesis on the cusp, ready to happen. Like, what will be the effect on runners and the running injuries, the most common running injuries for people who are dedicated to wearing carbon plated shoes?
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was really good insight, because I don't think anyone's actually said that yet. Right. And it is a thing where it's one of those things that's so new. There's not a lot of data points on there yet. And he said also too, he's like, I don't want to be a guy that relies on this. I want to feel good because I feel good, not because I have this shoe on and I need it to feel good. But, it just, the insight too, from the elite perspective of, their arsenal of shoes and what they're pulling out. I mean, he went through about 7 different shoes in different scenarios, from workouts to easy runs to longer runs that might be a little harder. And, I think back to college, and I had my trainers, and I had, some steeple spikes, and I had some non-steeple spikes, and I had some spikes I wore for cross country. And then I had my trainers. Like, I don't even think we had flats that we wore for workouts, so it's just the kind of the breadth of product that they have in their arsenal to go through for different scenarios. It's pretty cool when you actually hear how they're making decisions and how many options they have. So
don't date yourself too much, Ryan.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think it's interesting.
Trainers.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was technology or just like budget my coach was not willing to spend. So
I think we're on the cusp of a different perception on like, what footwear rotation is going to look like when we talk about super specificity to, recovery thoughts, and I just think it'll be interesting to see how this affects innovation and overall like amount of silhouettes, amount of tools in your toolbox, right? And so we're trying to stay ahead of that. We want to have those conversations. We want to find the next innovation. Carbon plates are cool, but what's the next thing, coming down the pike? Because we know that the other the brands are already talking about it. There's something that we don't know about quite yet, but we're gonna get down underneath the grandstand and start poking around and getting some stories to find the next innovation. So, guys, thanks for joining us again today. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time beneath the grandstand.